All right. So, welcome to our Daugherty class on Y-DNA questions and answers. And I'm going to invite board member Michael Lacopo. Did I do that right this time? I'm going to get there. No?
Lakapo.
Lacopo. Oh, and you're muted, Mike. So, lock.
Uh,
So, Michael's going to introduce Zach.
Yes, it's Lakapo, which for those of you who were here last month, when we had the starting discussion on Y-DNA, I do have an Italian surname, but I do have a Daugherty grandfather on my mother's side. So I am not a fraud. I really belong here. For those of you who are with us last month, or those of you that were not, I did give a kind of a beginning Y-DNA class. And that is posted in our Daugherty Facebook page that it was recorded and you can review that. We did have a spammer jump in, but I think that has all been edited out, so we are in good shape. Yes, we have Zack Daugherty, who has the surname, so he's not the fraud that I am. He is the one of the administrators of the Daugherty Y-DNA project. I harass him on a regular basis to help me with my big Y testing, and we compare and contrast different Daughertys. So he knows his stuff, and we are lucky to have him here with us today. And I think he's going to walk us through, how we deal with our Y-DNA results and how they work on family tree DNA. But if you want more information, you can go look at last month's lecture because it's going to dovetail really nicely with today's. So I'll let Zack take it over from here.
Okay.
Zack's the bomb. You love him.
Hello, everyone. As Michael mentioned, I'm Zack Daugherty. I am a active administrator for the Daugherty Surname Project, and that's simply a project that's hosted at Family Tree DNA that started back in 2003, 2004. And my background is basically fisheries wildlife is what I've am schooled in. So I done my doctorate down here in Miami. That's how I ended up here, researching marine aquaculture. How do we farm fish, more sustainably and so forth. But I'm avidly interested in genealogy and genetic genealogy. So that's how I kind of got into, applying genetic genealogy to questions I have associated with not only my Daugherty ancestry, but all my ancestry. But I just happen to really get a kick out of also exploring the Daugherty ancestry just because it's a name I have. So, like many of us. So let me share my screen here. And we'll share screen too. And okay, how does that look? Good? Okay. So today, going on like beyond what Michael showed with his Daugherty group and his Y-DNA results and so forth, I'm going to just sort of walk through the key features I find the most important for the Family Tree DNA platform for doing sort of stuff associated with surname research, and also sort of introduce people to what the Surname Project is in this platform. So it's more of just a looking through some of these features and maybe discussing them at the end. Like I don't. Hopefully, this won't take a whole hour of just showing what I think are these key features because I do want to have some Q&A from anyone that might be interested in that. So we'll just get into it here. The Daugherty Surname Project, as I mentioned before, it came about in about 2003, 2004. I'm not for sure the date at which Family Tree DNA started selling commercial DNA tests. I think Michael covered that in the presentation last month, but it's not, I don't believe it's too much earlier than that right there. So it's probably a fairly old surname project at Family Tree DNA. It's largely primarily focused around Y-DNA testing, and I'll briefly explain why that is on the next slide. But that's not to say that you can't join it if you can't do a Y-DNA test, for example. Anyone's allowed to join, even if you just have autosomal DNA tests and so forth. That's fine. But the reason we focus on Y-DNA testing is because it's ideal when you're dealing with Western European surname lineages, where usually the surname gets passed down father to sons, father to sons, father to sons. And the Y chromosome, which is, again, it's only male inherited chromosome, where a male will have an X and a Y, and a woman will have an X and an X. But what's unique about the Y chromosome, why it's so good for doing some deeper lineage testing, is because it's 100% passed from father to son. And along that way, throughout the generations, it will pick up a mutation here, a mutation there, that sort of serves as a roadmap that you could follow backwards with. But unlike some other testing, which we'll get into a little bit here, it's really good for keeping along the lines of the surname. Usually it's when it first started out, the project, and this was also with commercial DNA testing, family tree DNA, it was what are called low marker STR tests. I don't want to delve too much in the weeds of STR testing, but you could go back and watch Michael's presentation for that. But those are more ephemeral or variable, and the low marker tests, you would end up matching everyone in Western Europe, at those earlier versions of the tests. So they were very difficult to discern how related you are when you have a match. Right now, the project clocks in at about 952 members. Now, we do have members that they're not a Daugherty, or they have a cousin who is a Daugherty, or they might just be someone that matches Daugherty's kind of distantly, and they still join the project. We don't really clamp down on who could join, so some of that might not really represent, purely only Daugherty testers. But again, everyone's welcome that has an interest in doing that type of testing, and that's the link to the project. So briefly going over this again, Michael covered some of this, but it's more focused on lineage-specific testing up the patrilineal line. So it's a uniparental test. Again, that means that 100% of that particular type of DNA is passed down father to son, father to son. So nothing is lost over the generations. So it's really good at driving a rigid spine up that particular patrilineal line. Now they're at Family Tree DNA, they now have a few different tests. They used to have more, as Michael covered before. They had like a Y67, which was a good test, but now they only offer Y37, Y111, and the big Y700. Now these are all inclusive. So for instance, if you tested Y111, you have all the 37, but you got another, X number of markers to get you up to 111. Same thing with the big Y700. It gives you all that 111 STRs plus another 500 and some odd STRs. I forget the number, actually 600 and some odd. And most importantly, Y SNPs, which are, again, mutations that are more permanent and rigid. Once they form in the Y chromosome, they don't really back mutate. They stick around. They last. Whereas those Y STRs can bump up and down and become a bit more ephemeral and a bit murky in some cases, and in some cultures, for instance, it's just it's more difficult to go purely off of YSTR tests. The other uniparental test is mitochondrial, and that's your mother to daughters and son, but the son doesn't pass it on. But it's the matrilineal line, so your mom's mother's mother, so forth. So when you're matching on an mtDNA test, you're only could match you're matching that person at a certain point in time up each of your respective matrilineal lines. And then the third test that everyone's more common with, that Family Tree DNA also has an offering of, called the Family Finder test. That's an autosomal DNA test. So that's biparental, that covers all the lines. But because of recombination over the generations, it gets pretty murky pretty quickly on trying to discern relationship when you start getting into, I would say, 200 years back or 5 to 8 generations back. It's difficult, and it takes a lot of careful work to make use of when you're going that far back. So this is what your platform or test at FTDNA looks like, your dashboard, I should say. It's usually broken up into certain parts. So the mitochondrial results would be here, and this is an image of my dashboard that I took a screenshot of. But I've taken the mitochondrial test, I've done the family finder test, and that's what this section is. So that's your autosomal DNA. And then it has a large Y-DNA component here, which is what we'll quickly be covering over. And first, I'm going to get into what these are, again, the features that I find important. There's a lot of features on here that I won't be able to cover this whole presentation, but I'm going to touch on the ones that I think are the most important, which the first being is the Y-DNA matches. So what this is, when you click on this button, is you'll see a list like this. And Michael showed some of his too last time, and this is what it looks like. And these are purely the YSTR matches, so that earlier type of DNA test. The one that I said that could be a bit ephemeral in that it can be difficult to really parse out people very well, because it could bounce up and down in value to where you could end up having two men looking closely related, but they might not be exactly. And we'll get into why the Y SNPs are more important to discern that. But looking at this, you could see that this is my match list at 111 markers. So actually, let me back up one. The view type is simply a way of showing a detailed view, which we're looking at right now, and then a table view, which just sort of compresses the view to where you could see a lot more on the screen at once. The STR marker level is what's important. Because I've taken a big Y700 test, I have all the STR markers, but they just show 111. So you could see here, I have 111 marker tests that I'm clicked on, that I'm filtering to, and I have 61 matches. I have 305 matches at 67 markers. I have 298 at 37 markers, and so on. When we're getting down into these 25 and 12, this is where you start matching people 2,000, 3,000 years back, well before surnames. So it's not particularly relevant. There are instances where it could be, but again, these aren't no longer tests that you could just buy straight out. So it's usually the 37 and the 111. What you see next is your match's name. Again, that person is matching me on my patrilineal line. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's not up their maternal line that I'm matching them on. It's not up, their father's mother's line, nothing like that. We are only matching on our father's line. So that's why, again, it can be quite useful for examining your surname. And what we see here is the match's name, and then this is the test that the match has taken. You can see here that this first match, which I'll just tell you is my father's test, because I've tested him too. You can see he's transferred autosomal DNA. I think I did that from Ancestry DNA. He's done a full mitochondrial DNA. That's for another genealogy project of mine, because there's something interesting up that line, not related to Daugherty's. And I've done the big Y700 test. So he has all these markers as well tested. This also is showing sort of the same thing. He's tested up to 700 markers, and this is genetic distance. I don't want people to confuse that with generation distance. Genetic distance is just sort of how many mutational differences there are in the STRs. Him and I are exact match. So when you look at the Y111 test results for us, we look identical. We look like twins. And that's just to begin, because he passed 100% of his Y chromosome to me, and it just didn't pick up any mutations. So that's why we're an exact match. Other points of interest are haplogroups. You could see this here. We'll get into a little bit more of what this is, but that's kind of important information. All these haplogroups are very close together. That's why they show up here to begin with, but you'll see these different numbers. Just don't stress that they're different, because you might be still closely related to some of these individuals when you see that list. And this, sometimes people don't always post this, but this is the most distant known ancestor or earliest known ancestor on the patriline. And this symbol is basically, do they have a family tree or not? It's a little confusing now, because family tree DNA used to have it to where you build your tree in their platform, but now it's linked to MyHeritage. I haven't really explored that much myself, so I can't talk too much on that. But that's a good way if you're wanting to really get into the weeds more, because this earliest known ancestor bit of information is kind of useless. You know, you can't, it's character limited. I just have a name of someone. I have a date that he died in 1808 in Cape Girardeau. It's not the most helpful for genealogists to research. And then the time predictor is based on the genetic distance. What's the estimated time to most recent common ancestor between me and that match? And what that will look like is this. So if I click on the time predictor for my father and me, it says we're at genetic distance 0 and at 111 markers, so we're identical. And it estimates we might have a common ancestor 1850, but that has a error range of 1750 to 1950. Well, the common ancestor is my father. It's his Y chromosome, and it's us two being compared. He was born in 1949, so it captures him well enough. But this will change, of course, when you start delving into different genetic distances and different levels of testing with people. Here's a different view I like. David Vance, he works at Family Tree DNA, but he's wrote an excellent book on using Y DNA for genetic genealogy. He used this source of McDonald time to most recent common ancestor calculator, and he built these cool little graphs. And this is a Y37 test, but it shows if I have a genetic distance, that's on the x-axis here, with a match at Y37 of 1, then it could be an average of 5 generations back to a common ancestor up that line, but an error range of 1 generation to 15 generations. 15 is quite far. If we go all the way up to what Family Tree DNA reports as a Y37 match at 4, it could be 14 generations average, but 6 to 28. So again, it's really far. However, when you start to compare at higher level testing like Y111, you could see that a generation or a genetic distance of 1 could be an average of 2 generations back with a confidence interval of 1 to 8. So it collapses a little bit, that scope. It's still sort of random on whether or not you pick up these mutations on the Y chromosome over time, but when you start to compare two men at higher and higher levels of testing, it helps narrow the playing field a little bit to get a better sense of time to a most recent common ancestor. The next feature I will go over is the block tree, and this is if you take a big Y level of testing. This is very important because this is associated with the Y-SNP mutations. Unlike the STRs, again, once they form in a Y chromosome, they are passed down through thousands of years. They very rarely, if ever, back mutate or anything like that. So they serve as strong anchor points along the way to show that you're connected to certain individuals. This is what a block tree view looks like. And you could see here, mine is showing me my branch, for instance. It doesn't show me, it won't list my name here. It just lists who I share a block with. That person is again, my father. So if I click on that block, it'll pull up a screen here that will show who that match is. Again, I'm using a shared mode, so it's protecting the identity of people. That's why it's blurred out. But it's showing me that at Y37, we have 0 differences. Y67, 0. Y111, 0. So it's just a way of showing how closely we're related. It's identical when you're comparing all that type. But we do have one Y-SNP difference. That actually formed in me. My father doesn't have it. So if I test a son in the future, my son and I will form a new haplogroup, is what that means, basically. That doesn't always happen. One of these Y-SNPs form roughly once every 3 to 5 generations in a patrilineal line. But in the case of my father and me, one formed in me. So going back to this block tree view, this is, again, as an administrator, this is sort of what I look at first if a person tests up to a big Y level test, because, again, those Y-SNPs are easier to interpret than the STRs are. So what we have here is the relationships. I know what these relationships are for this entire block of testers. That's Y126341. All of that haplogroup level, these are all testers that I target tested. So I did the genealogy and the descendancy from my brick wall ancestor. I found all the various sons he had, the sons they had, and so forth, and built an extensive descendancy tree using careful genealogy practices until I found these distant cousins that are strangers to me, and talked to some of them, sent mails or letters to them, and I said, "Hey, would you be willing to help me with a Y-DNA test if I pay for it?" And usually they were game, they were for it. So this whole block of testers are people that I know are related to me, but I just sort of wanted to explore what mutations my brick wall had and what formed in my line down to me after that brick wall. So I tested a first cousin, my father's younger brother's son, that I grew up friends with, and he tested for me. And you could see here, he does not share this haplogroup Y-SNP that my father and I have. That means this BY18291 formed in my father, but it wasn't in my grandfather, and it didn't get passed to my first cousin. So it's kind of a bit out of the average that a Y-SNP formed in my father and a new one formed in me, but it does happen. But he does have this A24483. That means my grandfather had it, so it formed either in my grandfather or someone up his chain nearby. This is a second cousin twice removed. Now, my common ancestor with this individual is my third great grandfather. However, he is 2 generations closer. That's a 2 generations removed to that third great grandfather of mine. So it's his first great grandfather, my third, and he also does not have these 2 haplogroup levels. He doesn't have those Y-SNP mutations. So that means this A24487 is in my third great grandfather, but it isn't. These other ones below that aren't ones that he had that he passed down to this individual. Moving up further out, and this goes all the way up to my brick wall ancestor, who's the most recent common ancestor with these 3 testers. Well, with 2 of the testers, I should say. And they are all a generation or 2 higher than me. So for instance, this fourth cousin, twice removed, he was born to the youngest son of my brick wall ancestor. However, I was born to the oldest son of my brick wall ancestor. He was born to the youngest, but he's 2 generations higher compared to me. So he has less mutations, and none of these men, you could see, would form a haplogroup block because they all branched away at this brick wall ancestor. So what I learned from this is that my brick wall ancestor has these mutations. They formed either in him at his birth or slightly before him. But beyond this, I do not know how I'm related exactly to this group of testers and this individual tester. They're closely related, and we'll show that in a little bit. But probably at around 1600 AD is the most recent common ancestor. And with that, I want to get into some of the Discover tools that help visualize this a little bit better. So you could see that on the dashboard here when you get into the Discover tools. If you're logged in, and there's a few different ways to get to there, but Discover Haplogroup Reports is sort of the ideal landing page for that platform. And this is something new that Family Tree DNA introduced in the last couple of years, but I do enjoy a lot of the features of the platform. This is what it looks like when you land at that haplogroup page. It will tell you your haplogroup story if you're logged in. Now, with that, again, it's showing that the haplogroup block that my father and I created is right here, called BY18291. It doesn't matter. Just think of that as just a catalog number when they're creating a catalog of mutations they find. Its name doesn't particularly have any significance. It's just that the only 2 men to date that have it are my father and me. And if I tested my brother, he would of course have it too. So it will show that, and it will describe when it branched off its parental Y-SNP or haplogroup. So the level above it, it will tell you when it branched off from that. and it says by about 1850. It says the most recent common ancestor probably was born around 1900. Well, I know for a fact my father was born in 1949, so it's a little off, but that's not bad, you know. It's off by some, you know, 4 decades, 4 to 5 decades. Again, it doesn't know anything about this person being my father. It just is looking at the mutations, and because there's a science behind how quickly these mutations happen, it's able to calculate when you tie into one another on these lines. Furthermore, it will tell you how many testers fall into that category. Two, and that the earliest known ancestors reported to be in Ireland. Now that's user data related. It doesn't know anything about that ancestor. It's just that both of the testers, me and my father, know that our brick wall ancestor came from Ireland, so that's where it's getting that data from. Actually, let me see if I could switch over to a different view here. Yeah. Okay. So if I scroll down, you could see a little bit more information about the haplogroup level. Actually, what this is, I want to get into that in a second here. Go back to this. These badges here are essentially associated with like what they think they know about certain aspects of your haplogroup. Somewhere up the chain, it says Celtic mystery ancestor. It also has rare DNA connections. So these are associated with people they find in academic studies where they do archaeology. They could test the DNA of some of these bones they dig up from 600 AD, 800 AD, 1200 AD that these individuals live. And the closest one was someone on the Faroe Islands that is Irish ancestry, but was sailing around the Faroe Islands, for instance. And rare notable connections are individuals that they know the haplogroups of someone important in history, and how close you might match some of those individuals. So that's what the haplogroup story looks like. I'm going to skip the country frequency, the notable connections. That's what I was mentioning about pilgrims. Those are interesting aspects, but I just don't want to. I want to save enough time for questions later. Migration map and globe tracker are kind of similar. They sort of build through an algorithm and looking at the ancient DNA that they find along the way and so forth. They work to show where each level of these haplogroups arose throughout time on throughout the continents during the migration period. It's a little difficult in Ireland because, for instance, I have my most distant known ancestors Ireland, but I don't know where. I assume Donegal, but I don't have a document that shows that, so I can't put an exact location. So that's not helpful. So when you look at my migration path, it just shows that my ancestor was like right smack dab in the middle of Ireland. So I'm skipping that view for right now. That can be important for those that have known ancestry in specific parts of Ireland, though. So that's can provide a interesting insight into that. But what I want to skip to, the next feature is called the match time tree that I find very helpful. I also will briefly show the ancestral path feature and the scientific details feature. Now, the match time tree is, again, it's for big Y testers, but what it looks at is it shows sort of like that haplogroup block, which I'll pull up again here in a second, but it shows a steps of these Y-SNP mutations as they occur and which people have certain ones and which do not. So if we look at this, right here is myself. I think I have this. Yeah, here we go, listed. This is me, and then this is my father. We created, again, that haplogroup, and that mutation I know now formed in my father because my first cousin doesn't have it. So my father's father did not have it. Father's father had this mutation. But we both have that. We both stem off of that. My first cousin, he has one up the chain, and that's, again, represents my grandfather. Unfortunately, I couldn't test I couldn't determine any mutations that occurred in my great-grandfather or my second great-grandfather, and that's because my second great-grandfather had no additional sons. He only had my great-grandfather. And then my grandfather, all of his brothers died in World War II and so forth, so I couldn't test any of them. So this mutation either happened in my grandfather, my first great-grandfather, or my second. I really don't know on that. But if we go up to my third great-grandfather, where the most recent common ancestor with this individual, you could see that they had this mutation. Going up again to my brick wall ancestor, all of them have this mutation. Then we go up to these individuals here that it lists that they're most distant known ancestors from Donegal, and this is another project administrator, Bob Daugherty, who might be in on this presentation watching, but he and his brother have tested Big Y, so they formed their own haplogroup here, and they're represented there. And then this individual here is known to have their patrilineal ancestry in Buncrana, Donegal. So that's sort of some useful information that could imply that my ancestors and Bob's ancestors here could be from somewhere in there. We at least know that Donegal is a decent spot, regardless of knowing anything about the Daugherty surname. Going back to this, so if we look at this view, you could see that is showing these haplogroup levels and people that have some of these haplogroups and ones that do not. So they're stemming off, they're branching off. That's again this same view we're looking here at the haplotree. It's just sort of spun around, but this block tree view is really important for isolating your closest known matches first and foremost, and they're less ambiguous than just looking at that list of YSTR matches. So again, that's just sort of like the spun around version of that that block tree view. The ancestral path is an interesting one. So say you have a list of all these different haplogroups you have in your YSTR matches. They have these different haplogroups that don't match yours. It's just like, well, that's a little confusing. Well, you could look at this ancestral path view and you could see, you're like, oh, well, this one branches off of this one. So this 18291 is a descendant of this A24483. And that A24483 is a descendant of that one. So this is just sort of a nested view of these haplogroups and as they arise. Again, this Y-SNP mutations happen about, on average, once every 3 to 5 generations. And my family, for whatever reason, I would say it's a little faster. Once every 1 to 3 generations, there was one of these occurring. And that's just random, but it provides some nice granular data. But the reason I like this view is because it will show the age estimate of that haplogroup, 1900. But again, my father was born in 1949, but still it's not bad. It will also show how many tested descendants there are, 2, father and me. This next haplogroup level is actually my first cousin. So my father, me, and him, 3. And then so on and so forth. And we will work our way up to briefly this important haplogroup of BY471. If you click on the little eyes next to some of these, it will give more granular data about the date. So it's saying that when I clicked on, I believe this is the 1850 CE, the I, the date is an estimate based on the genetic information only. So again, it knows nothing about relationships of any of these men. But it's saying that the most recent common ancestor of all people that have this haplogroup level, that they share a common ancestor between 1732 and 1943. And the most likely estimate is 1860 rounded down to 1850. Well, again, that SNP was in my grandfather. He was born in 1929, I want to say. So it's a little off. 1850 is a little far back, but again, my family, for whatever reason, kind of generating Y-SNPs a little faster than normal. This is sort of that same view. This is comparing the haplogroup of just my father and me that we have. And you can see here the average time to most recent common ancestor between those two testers, my father and me, is 1914, and it rounds down to 1900. Again, my father was born in 1949, so it's not terrible. And obviously, this huge confidence interval captures that birth date of his, but it's probably not the most helpful, but it still helps isolate a little bit down if you know nothing about the relationship between you and a match. You could at least, with the 95% interval, be like, okay, me and this individual match each other between 1802 and 1980. Well, if it was 1980, we could figure that one out probably pretty quickly, but but 1802 would take a little bit more genealogical work to figure out that connection. Now I want to move over into the project groups just to explain a little bit. So as a project administrator, I try to help facilitate Y-DNA results that people will have come in when they take these tests and join the project. It's a little confusing, but especially if they only test like at Y37, it takes a bit more interpretation for me as an administrator to get them grouped together to men that I feel like they most closely match, so they could then explore their genealogy in tandem with their own. So it's based largely on just the Y-DNA testing. Again, Family Tree DNA just creates these groups for surname projects, and they're only associated with Y-DNA results. They have a mitochondrial result too, but that doesn't work for exploring a surname, for instance, that well. So the Daugherty project groups are based on Y-DNA tests only. And I consider them to be related, or I'll put them into a group together if I estimate that their time to most recent common ancestor is within the last 500 to 1,000 years. And that's pretty far back, because surnames weren't exactly solid and concrete 1,000 years ago in every single family. Some are even occur, or didn't become established even 500 years ago. But that's a rough estimate of if you're considered to be grouped into a certain subgroup with other individuals. That's sort of what I'm aiming for when I put you together. Overall, the project has 13 groups, and some of these contain several subgroups. The one I want to talk about, well, I'll talk about all of them briefly, but the largest and the oldest group is Group 1. And why that's the largest is because there's 300 related testers. Now, everyone that falls into Group 1 is related. And actually, it's based around this haplogroup, BY471. And they're estimated to all share a common ancestor around 775, which they average out to 800 CE or AD. But there's 300 testers that fall in this category, and I've broken it down into 30 subgroups because it's quite large. So I try to put those subgroups more closely related to one another. And it's generally dominated by variants of the Dochartaigh surname. It also contains the McDevitt or McDevitt and McDade and so forth variant surnames in Donegal. Generally, they fall into this category too. They're positive for this Y SNP in that haplogroup. Now, the reason this is interesting is if you follow some of the history of what is believed to be in the ancient annals and the old medieval Irish genealogies, is that the progenitor was the first Dochartaigh might have lived around this period. However, the surname's not recorded in history until like 1200 CE in the annals, I believe. But the progenitor is believed to have lived earlier than that. And what's interesting about this haplogroup is that it aligns with the nearby surnames of, again, those ancient Irish genealogies purport, which is like the Kin O'Connell. So O'Donnell, O'Boyle, Gallagher, they're relatively closely matched to this. They're just a few haplogroup blocks above where they tie in. So that's usually why we consider the Group 1 to be likely from the progenitor of the surname. Continuing the Group 1 information, I have to break it into several subgroups just because it becomes a bit unwieldy. But I go down 5 haplogroup levels deep. So when you see like it's notation XXXXX, that's basically different haplogroup levels that you go down into. So this haplogroup, or this Group 10000, that's the basal level of this older 800 AD haplogroup. And now people will form subgroups off of that because they descend out of that individual. And this is sort of what that looks like. I might have a better view here. So if I'm scrolling through, you could see all of these are group 1 individuals, but subgroups of group 1. So these green ones. So you see group 1, 1. And all you see, this is a public view. This isn't private data, so anyone could follow this link. But you'll see the most distant known ancestor surname. You'll see their most distant ancestor information. You'll see the level of tests they took, and the haplogroup that they have. These are YSTRs. These are a little confusing. I won't get too much into those, but that's what I usually interpret if they only do like a Y37 or Y111 test on getting them into their own subgroups, closely related subgroups. But you can see how large the group 1 testers are, and you can see like this huge McDevitt group that's also related as well. And then we have some McCools and Campbells, and there's some interesting potential reasons why that is, that I'll leave for another talk. But with this, we go into other groups that I have. Some of these are not related in any surname or genealogical time. That's why there's so much color variation here. But some of these I have, like these blue haplogroups or these subgroups. These are men related in a surname period. They're just not related to the group ones, but for whatever reason, they are just as much Daughertys as anyone else, and they're worth exploring, in my opinion. So I'm always excited when we could break these groups down at a more granular level and try to push back and see when time to most recent common ancestor is with some of these. So I'm always excited when a new tester comes in and forms some of these new groups along the way. Group 2 is a basal group, and this is older, but they're M222 plus. That's just a haplogroup that formed about 2,000 years ago. It's one's group 1 descend from, but these people do not have this BY471. So most of these men that I have broken in these subgroups are not related in a surname era, with the exception of some of our testers have formed a subgroup that is related, and their most recent common ancestor is 1500 CE. Group 3, it's large. That's those blue ones I was showing earlier. They all have this M269 that formed, oh gosh, I want to say 11,000 years ago, well before surnames, and probably in the, I would say, like Western Asia or the steppe region. They definitely do not have this M222 plus. So they're much more distant related to, like, say, group 1 or group 2 Daughertys, but they do form their own subgroups, more closely related groups within. And we have one, for example, is group 3105, and it's a tester with known ancestry that's usually in Indiana, for instance, and they've done some exhaustive testing, and they're still trying to figure out the genealogical connections between them. But their most recent common ancestor, the furthest known in this whole group, is 1550 CE, for example. And the rest of the groups, as I'm getting closer to finishing up here, is haplogroups A, E, I, G, J, T. Those are so far back, they tie into like Africa, essentially. You have to go that far back to find the most recent common ancestor up the Patra line to testers that come out with this haplogroup level. Most of these testers don't have an Dochartaigh surname, so they're probably people that joined the project that have Daugherty ancestry elsewhere, but they just wanted to join the surname project. But it's looking at their Y-DNA that they got from their father. So that's why they're in those groups. We do have some that are in this, like a haplogroup I, where three Daugherty testers do match each other. Haplogroup I kind of, they think, it's usually Scandinavian dominant. So a lot of people that come out of Scandinavia usually have a haplogroup I, not exclusively, but again, this requires more testers joining in to sort of get a handle on how far back the Daugherty surname was used within this group. So the last thing I want to talk about before I kick over into questions is, how do we stitch these lineages together? It looks kind of confusing, all the haplogroups, the blocks, the Y-SNPs, the YSTRs. And one way I try to approach it as an administrator and also as an enthusiast looking at my own ancestry and applying genetic genealogy to all the Y-DNA testing I've done is to build what I call a mutation history tree. And I didn't coin this phrase or come up with it. I've seen other people do this, and I'll try to follow up and share some links with that later, or post some of those on Facebook. But what that is a combination of pulling in the Y SNPs, the STRs, and the genealogical data you have that you could bring to bear to try to show some of these men within these subgroups, let's say, or within a larger group, and how closely one lineage is related to one or not related to one. So that's essentially the goal of building these mutation history trees. They provide placement of lineages relative to one another. Now, the benefits, there's a couple benefits when you do this. It could provide genealogical hotspots. And what I mean by that is for instance, my ancestry came into the colonial United States and probably in the 1780s. I'm not really for sure of the exact date. Oral history says 1798, but I find that that my brick wall ancestor actually had a document in Ohio in 1796, 2 years before that. So that kind of, is a misnomer in what is real and what was reported orally. But I don't know where in Ireland he came from. I just am pretty sure that he was born in Ireland. All of his children said that he was, and so forth. So what does this mean? Well, if I place my lineage next to some other Y-DNA tested lineages that do have known ancestry at certain locations in Ireland, that could kind of imply that my ancestor might have came from there. Maybe not exactly, maybe not right next to him, but it's a geographical hotspot of where my colonial immigrant ancestor might have came from. The other thing is benefit of doing these mutation history trees is what lineage is closest to you and what is not, because that means you should channel your focus and your research into not only your own brick wall, but also the brick wall of that nearby lineage. So maybe you could potentially make some connections. It helps isolate where you might want to do some research further, and maybe your closest matching lineage hasn't really done rigorous genealogical research into their brick wall. So maybe you could have a breakthrough there. Again, it's getting a little difficult when we're talking about 1700s or further back, especially lack of records in Ireland, earlier than the early 1800s. But it's still sort of beneficial to where you could kick in from a genealogical tree into a genetic tree. So it's like, I know I match these people. They come from this part of the County Donegal, let's say. Maybe that's where I come from too. Actually, before I show that, I want to show what this looks like, because I have an example of a mutation history tree I've done. So this chart, I'm zoomed basically a 10-mile view out, but this is sort of like my nearby subgroup within group one. So if I look at the very top here, I've got that 800 CE or AD haplogroup that group one is based on, which is BY471. There's these other Y-SNP mutations that exist with that one that are yet to be broken apart, but anyone that's positive for this has all of these as well. This is a little outdated. There's actually 72 branches, I believe now, and I want to say 180 testers, so I should update this, that fall under this BY471 umbrella. Again, there's 300 Y-DNA testers, but not all of them have done big Y testing, so this is based on largely big Y data. But if you follow down those branches, this 471, and then a haplogroup that descends out of it is this 470, that's some descendant of this individual. So this represents an individual. This represents a descendant of that individual, and it could be a few generations. Could be as close as one, but it could be like 3. So this person could be a great-grandfather to this person, for instance. And then you keep stair-stepping down until you get to where we kick over into known genealogy. So let me go to the bottom here, and you can see me. I'm tested here, and again, I have that one non-matching Y-SNP with my father, because I said one formed in me at my birth that my father doesn't have, and that's this BY18297. So I have this sitting on top of me that just means it formed in me. But if you go up to my father, you could see that he and I share two types of mutations. We share this Y SNP, that haplogroup I mentioned that only he and I belong to because it formed in him. And there was also a YSTR test that formed in him as well. I just cataloged that because it adds a little bit more granularity between some of these lineages when you get both of these mutations into the mix. But if we scroll over, my dad's brother, son, my first cousin I tested, he doesn't have this YSTR mutation. He doesn't have this Y SNP. That means my grandfather did not have those mutations. That's why they're placed above my father. Now going up to my grandfather, again, he had brothers. I could not test them. They died in World War II. They died in 1980. So I can't really tell what mutations he had that they didn't have. But I'm able to then determine at least that some of these mutations occurred from my second great grandfather down to my grandfather. And how I did that is because I tested this second cousin twice removed of mine, who I know branches off my third great grandfather up here. And because he shares this haplogroup, this Y SNP, I know that my third great grandfather then had it because that's our common ancestor. So it at least formed in him. And then moving up, we get to my fourth great grandfather. And again, I tested a different son of his that I did not descend from. I went out, did the genealogy, went down through the genealogy, and this individual had many sons, so I had no shortage of options here. But I went out, and these were strangers to me. Again, I approached them, and I found this individual. I said, "Hey, would you like to test?" And he's like, "Sure." So I got them to test. Found out they had their own Y SNP that formed that none of us have. So that formed somewhere in this chain of men. But I'm not going to go breaking out and testing extra sons of these guys. It's too much work. I mean, too much money, I should say. But and it wouldn't help me genealogically. But moving out, then back up to my fourth great grandfather, I have tested two sons descendant just to see what mutations happened in him that he had and which ones happened after him. Going back up to my brick wall, I say born before 1779. He died for sure in 1808 because I have some of his probate information. But he's purported to be an immigrant from Ireland. And the first documentation of him shows up in Pennsylvania in 1796. But I went out, and he had two other sons, and I went through and found descendants of them. And again, I did the descendancy work to find these testers, and I tested two men. Unfortunately, one of them has since passed away, but thankfully he tested for me, and he's a fourth cousin twice removed to me. He's 2 generations higher compared to my brick wall, and he's actually had the least amount of mutations out of anyone in my family group. And because of that, he ends up showing up as a closer match to these testers I don't know how I'm related to, than he does to myself, because I had a lot of mutations that happened in me. So the reason I tested descendants of my brick wall that branched away from me is just to kind of get an idea and isolate when some of these mutations happened in my brick wall and which ones are ones that I could kind of ignore that happened after him down to me. Because then I kind of have a snapshot of what my brick wall ancestors' Y chromosome looked like. And I could then compare him to nearby lineages. And some of these lineages is, again, like fellow administrator Bob Daugherty, him and his brother have tested, and they represent this lineage that's nearby. And we're estimated to share a common ancestor around 1600. Then you go up another SNP level, you go back down, and you see some of these other lineages. These dashed lines are simply known family groups. So these people have known relation. That's why you see the genealogy data known and matching, and then they're matching these mutations. These are 3 testers that are known to have ancestry in a particular point area of Donegal outside. I'm probably going to butcher this, but Letterkenny or something. Donegal. So because they're nearby matches, and because I match them somewhere in the late 1500s, it helps me know that my immigrant might have came from Donegal somewhere in that region, for example. Um, Now, some of these are just single lineage testers. So you see this huge column of testers of genealogical known data, and they're just sitting as individuals. I know that they tie in at certain time frames, so they are more distantly related to me, but you could see that they're more closely related to these other individuals. So it helps to layer this information, the YSTRs, the YSNPs, and the genealogical data to know where to focus your research and maybe also unlock some of the geographical areas that your ancestor might have came from if you didn't know. So that's essentially what a mutation history tree is. I hope to try to work on some more of these for various subgroups within the project when time allows, but something I need to try to get a handle on and ask testers for is a better genealogical lineage. So I just basically put down birth, death, and names, but that's enough information to sort of go out and do some genealogical research off of. So yeah, let me go back to the slides here. That's pretty much it. I guess I ended up taking about an hour, but I'd like to answer any questions people might have. And again, there's so many of these topics I could cover, but they would take hours upon hours of like delving into the various features of FTDNA. So yeah. Anyways, any questions?
This is where you'd raise your hand, wave around on the screen that we can unmute you so that you can then ask Zach questions.
I'll just throw in there. I've been, as Zach has been going on, I've been adding a little commentary and a little links and whatnot in the chat if you're not following it. So just kind of playing on what he's already telling us. So if you've not checked that, check that. I think Kathleen had a question for you, Zach.
Yeah.
Can she unmute herself?
We could probably just turn it on so people could unmute themselves now.
Yeah. I think Kathleen was actually just like doing the clapping hands.
Yeah,
Oh,
that
I
was
see.
brilliant,
Sorry.
Zach. Thank you.
She was throwing a party for how great he did.
Yeah.
Well, I just hope it's not too confusing. I mean, for me, it's YDNA is a bit more simple than autosomal, even though we all test autosomal and we should. I mean, if you're doing genetic genealogy, I just find it a little easier in that you know how you match someone. You only match them in one certain way. Now you might not know the exact relationship, but it's a little easier to wrap my head around because it's only through that one line that you're matching. So,
Zach, could I just mention a minute about my Daugherty YDNA project that I'm doing within this as a subgroup here? Rosie and I have an interesting situation where all of our great grandparents are Daugherty, and so of those 4 different lines, I have been able to do YDNA tests on 3 of them, finding a male cousin on the one great grandmother line to test there. Our grandfather told his children, our dad, that none of his grandparents were related to one another. But Zack and I found through doing 2 of my Mellon Head Daugherty lines that they indeed connected probably a couple hundred years before they lived. So I can't really tell them at this point. Well, they probably already know if they're in heaven, but that they actually really were cousins and were connected by YDNA. So that was kind of fun to find out.
Well, I made a note also in the comments when Zach showed his the I can't remember what family tree DNA calls it, like the time tree. He has a match that goes back to a SNP that was developed around circa 1600, and that's someone that they know is from Buncrana. So that gives you kind of a hint that even though Zach's brick wall is like with the immigrant, that he may have an ancestor a generation or two before that could also be originate in Buncrana. So that gives you nice geographical clues when you can actually build that Y-DNA tree.
Mhm.
So Matthew Wallace Gross has raised his hand.
Oh, we
Matthew,
just need
can you
you should be able to
unmute
unmute
yourself?
yourself now.
Yeah.
Hi, Zach. Thank you very much for doing this and doing everything you've done for the group. For those people who don't know, Zach obviously knows, but my dad was adopted, so I spit in a cup a few years ago, and it was really amazing to see the results come back, and the combination of that through with some other autosomal DNA from ancestry and some closer relatives able to sort of patch things together. But it's really quite amazing with just what's been put together here with all of the different testers, and obviously Zack and everyone else here that's been collating this information and organizing it. And so I had a couple of questions. So I come up as group 11111. 111, is it 111 or 5 1s? I think it's 111. 11111. Had it on the screen.
Yeah, it's a
Sorry.
little confusing. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
need to probably figure out a better way, but it's difficult because there are so many individuals under group one that I just broke it down that way. But you're in all ones, you say?
All ones. Yeah, everything's
Yeah,
one.
I see you. Yeah, I'm looking at that table now.
You're looking at it. Okay, yeah. So when I'm obviously, unless you test somebody more closely related to you, most of the results that you're going to see in the Daugherty surname group are going to be. I mean, the closest ancestor is going to be several centuries back, if you're lucky. Maybe many more than that, if it's further removed, unless you test somebody close to you. So, if 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 I were to get a tester that is a little bit more closely related, that's in in that direct male Daugherty line that my dad was born from. So let's say a sibling's grandchild of my dad's birth father, who would have been a Daugherty.
Mhm.
When something like that pops up, when you get a tester to do something like that, how how close is how accurate would you say? And I know you showed some examples, but how accurate would you say it is as far as showing you most your most recent connection as far as that genetic distance? And I have to say I'm not as comfortable with looking at all of this data that as I am with just looking at simple
Yeah,
the
yeah.
stuff you see on Ancestry with the autosomal DNA, which is pretty. It's for
Right.
People who are less, let's say, analytical minded.
No, it is. If you're talking about like through lines on Ancestry, it's nice when it shows you like you're likely matching this way. Now, sometimes it'll throw you into trees that you're not matching on, but
Right.
it's thinking
Yeah.
but yeah. No, the Y-DNA, like if you were to test, I think you were suggesting the most recent common ancestor with a potential tester would be a great grandfather, your great grandfather.
Most recent with the tester would be probably would be a it'd be a great it would be a common great grandfather would be the most recent common
Right.
ancestor. So yeah.
I mean, yeah, it will again, family tree DNA with all these tools, it doesn't know that you're related, like
Sure.
it doesn't make that, but it will you would pretty much I would assume I would need to go and look at how many private variants, and those, if you hear the term private variants, those are Y SNPs that you uncovered in your tests that no one else matches.
Mhm.
When you get another tester that's closely related to you, they probably will match some of those. So you would form a new haplogroup under there, and then that would show up in Discover. That will generate age estimates, like I was showing earlier. Again, those age estimates have a kind of a semi-wide margin of error, but you're related. It's more of a validation
Sure.
exercise. The reason I always suggest someone test maybe a second individual in their family line, like you suggest, is if they could go relatively high. I mean, great grandfather is about as close as I would ever suggest going, just because you guys might end up showing up as very similar. In my case, I wouldn't have known that without testing my father and all these people, which I spent a lot of money on. It wasn't really an exercise that helped me, but that I do think there's an advantage when you could go as high up as you can and then branch out to a sibling from that highest ancestor and then back down. Because then you start to establish all the mutations that he had and all the ones that occurred after him down to you. Well, now you could look at ones he had and start to compare sort of with nearby lineages a little bit. It again, it's not going to break down a brick wall right away, but I have had it do that in a different surname project. I tested a third great grandfather. His second his daughter was a second great grandmother of mine, so I don't know anyone that has his Y chromosome. They're long distance cousins, you know. I tested him, and because he had such good genealogy of the surname well tested, I was actually able to break a brick wall doing this by testing two descendants of his sons and then comparing it to known people, and it ended up leading us to without documentation to pretty much attribute who his father was. It's a bit complicated, but I mean it's definitely doable. But in terms of you like testing a someone you share a your great grandfather with, you are going to generate a new haplogroup. More than likely, it's going to branch off of where you're at, because I think the one you're at, I want to say is
I just branched off again, I think like a year and a half ago.
yeah, that's right. Because you a new tester joined and matched you, and you share a common ancestor at 1500 AD. Now that's still well before any documents, you know. I mean, but you know that him and you, his brick wall and your brick wall are more closely related than any other tester in the database, you know, for right now. So it's something that grows when more testers get involved and so forth. But if you were to test, for instance, someone that's shares your great grandfather like that, you're going to probably generate another haplogroup after that 1500 CE, and it's going to be in the 1800s more than likely.
Okay.
I could
Yeah.
predict that.
Well, what about, I see a lot of, obviously most of the names that are in the Daugherty surname group are variants of, Daugherty, one
Right.
time or the other. But, and, obviously you see the the occasional like Egans and Boyles, which, obviously they were living pretty close together back in the
Right.
old country. So presumably there's a little, exchanging of DNA there. But with some of the other names, there's a couple of little names that'll pop up that are, obviously they're not Doherty's, they're not none of those other sort of related um, common descent names from the mystery Irish ancestor. But would those? Do you know yourself of? Are there other cases that aren't, let's say, identified in the group that I can read that are like? There's a couple that'll say like father adopted or adoptee or something like that. Are there others where the names are clearly not? They're not Irish. They're not related to Inishowen Peninsula or any Donegal or any way, but they're known adoptees, for instance.
Are you talking about they have the Doherty surname but they don't match, or
No,
are you
I
talking
mean
about
they
vice
don't
versa?
have the Doherty surname, but they do match in
Yeah,
in a group one or something. Okay.
like you're in your case where you're
Like in my case, similar to my case.
yeah, we have several others that are like that. I mean, we have some that they found out later they did Y-DNA testing. They didn't know why, they were matching McDevitt's, and then they ended up finding documentation along the way that their great grandfather was a McDevitt. So it happens that way. And yeah, there's a good handful of people like that in the project, and more often than not, they are that. The other thing is again, surnames, especially in the case of ours, it's quite old, really. According to some historical context, it's one of the oldest ones out there. But I think some of the published research into like non-paternity events. Now that doesn't mean that anything foul happened or anything like that. but there's any number of reasons you might have a surname switch. But the rate is like 1 to 2% per generation. That compounds pretty greatly over
Yeah.
over 800 CE or 1000 CE to today. I wrote a blog on this, and it's on the Daugherty website we have. I wrote a blog on this a while ago, just sort of theory crafting if the first progenitor Dochartaigh existed around, let's say, 900 CE, and based on 30-year generation gaps, what's the probability of someone today having the Daugherty surname but not matching that progenitor? And it gets this upward of 38 to 52% probability of not. So it really compounds greatly. And again, we come into the surname in some way or another. It's kind of a unique surname in that I manage a few other surname projects like Potter, for example, or Wolf surname projects. Those are multi-origin, right? It's like Smith, they're multi-origin, so you're not going to expect to all match a progenitor Smith, 1,000 years ago. Ours is kind of unique in where it's surprising that there is such a large Group 1 Daughertys. I'd like to see more expansions in other surname testers like Gallagher, O'Donnell's, and so forth. There's not as many testers of those surnames but it would be really cool to see, because see if they form those large groups, because there's a few around us that exist, but the premise is that some of these questionable medieval Irish genealogies might actually have a decent nugget of truth in them, which is kind of exciting.
It seems to be that way. I know I've seen I don't know where I saw this. It may have been something you posted. It's hard to tell. But I remember seeing something not long ago, and it was some of those sort of allied families that are supposed to share common descent, and in the annals and what have you, and then showing where surname groups like we have for the Daughertys, that they may have for some of these other ones, even if they're smaller, where that like sort of original, like the 471 for Daughertys,
Yeah.
and where they branch off, and it seems to be verifying in some cases, at least echoing, at least in the DNA, some of what's already been written, which is kind of amazing because of how old it is. And I think oftentimes it's something old, you tend to poo-poo it, especially if it's in something called the annals, or it sounds a little
And
Tolkien-ish.
Matthew, I really appreciate your comments and your questions. And let's give a couple other people a chance to ask. And then if you have more comments, please jump back in,
Sure.
if that's all
Thank
right.
you.
Okay. So Aiden, you had your hand up there first, and then Deborah will get to you after Aiden. Aiden, you have to unmute.
So, hey, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, great presentation, Zach. Very interesting. I think that, what did you call it? Mutation tree? Really
Mutation history tree, yeah.
great work on that. You mentioned Letterkenny. I'm 5 miles from Letterkenny at the moment here. I live just outside Letterkenny. I can confirm there are a lot of Doughertys. My best friend growing up was a Daugherty. I live in a small village, and about 20% of everyone is a Daugherty. So very dense area for Doughertys here. It's just getting a little bit west of Inishowen, just a bit southwest of Inishowen, but all over County Donegal, it's really a real hotspot for Doughertys. What I was just going to say, you said you spent a lot of money getting those other relatives tested. I believe it. I've got the big boy as well. I think it was $400, I think, when I did it. But I guess that was probably really useful for you, because you got first-hand experience then of seeing that mutation rate. You could see you have one that your dad didn't have, and your dad has one that his brother didn't have. Really fascinating, great work you've done. I didn't really have any question, but just to say, really well done.
Yeah, I kind of nerded out spending that money. I just wanted to see. I mean, me testing my father, I don't recommend someone go dump out a bunch of money to test their brother and their father and so forth. Some project administrators do recommend that, but I don't see a real advantage. I think it's advantageous if you could go as far back as you can up your patrilineal line to your brick wall, then to a different son of his and back down. I think there's advantages there. It's hard for me to explain why I think it is, but you start to establish the mutations he had as if you almost got that ancestor, that brick wall ancestor, to do a Y-DNA test himself. And you back calculate that because you know what these two people had and what they didn't have. And you're able to build what that ancestor had. And then you're able to compare that ancestor. It's like climbing back up on a ladder, a scaffolding, and you kind of compare it to the next one over a little bit better. But
Just one
also,
question. I was just
sure,
sorry
sure.
for coming in. I was just going to ask you that the tree that you did that mutation history. What
Yeah,
did you use to do that? Is there a
I
particular tool that you use?
online platform Lucid Chart.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah, that's what I used, built it in.
thanks.
See, we need Aiden to be walking up and down the street handing out Y-DNA tests to all the
All right.
Daughertys.
Well,
Yeah, if I could
was
afford them, I would just say, here, test any Daugherty willing to test.
I, I want to put a plug in. I'm going to do an advertisement right now for that. One of the things that we have as a little pet project is to try to raise money. If any of you feel like donating to the cause, I'm going to be purchasing a few. I don't know how many I'm going to get. Zack and I are looking into what the cost is, but when I come back over here to Ireland in 2 months' time, I already have a few people that we've pinpointed that we want to test, and I've got a couple other local genealogists giving me ideas as to where we could do it. And we're hoping to get more local Irish Doughertys to actually test, feeling like that will help build out this tree. So if any of you want to donate to this project, go to our website and there's a donate page. We're also running a fundraiser for a local Dougherty business that suffered the terrible fire, and they're actually reopening their business on Wednesday, but it's the Doe Famine Village, and they're going to reopen on Wednesday. They've received a huge amount of donations, and we have helped with that. So just if you do donate, put in there that it's for the Y-DNA test so that I allocate the monies in the right direction. So end of advertisement. So, so Deborah, do you want to ask your question? You have to unmute there.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Sorry, it said, hi, I'm Deborah. I'm a little bit of a I'm related to the Kennel Gulban, is it? Is that how you pronounce it? You'll see from my last name, I'm a McPherson and I'm in the McPherson project, but I tested my brother and also a fifth cousin once removed, and we're into the neighboring county that Zack talked about. So I just wanted to raise the flag for that and say it would be great if more people did test, because I know what it's we're two leaves of a branch of a new branch, but we know that from working on ancestral records and doing the hard graft, I found a fifth cousin in Canada once removed, and he also agreed to test. So amazing, Zach, that you've got so many people that you can test. But yes, it is expensive. But you do, it just shows like how much you have to put in the graft to do your family tree. And I've done a combination of ancestry and family tree DNA. I've also done an mtDNA test there myself, so from my mother's side. But I helped my brother, and my cousin in Canada has been a great help as well. So brilliant presentation. Thank you. I joined because I wanted to learn more about how to read the block trees and stuff. So that was really useful, but it just shows the importance of other sorts of research as well.
Yeah, no, and the McPherson project is a pretty good project. I've seen. I think I might follow it some on Facebook. They have a Facebook group too and stuff, and
Yeah.
it seems like there's a lot of Y-DNA testing they're promoting too, which is cool. I mean, yeah, I don't necessarily, doesn't have to be Dougherty's only. Like I said, I'd like to see more Boyles and Gallagher's because I find that fascinating, and all those surnames. I mean,
Yeah, well, it's
and
interesting. We've got Boyles, but mostly we're related to the McAdams. They're our nearest DNA relative. But yeah, like I say, we're the cuckoo in the in the clan with the Scottish McPhersons of Badenoch. But so we're trying to establish how. But our earliest relative, our earliest known ancestor, which we've also researched back to, we think it's came in about 1650 to Scotland from Ireland. So we're the Irish that came into Scotland. So we are fully Irish, but
Mhm.
obviously my for a couple of 100 years we thought we were all Scottish. So you never know
Right.
what you're going to get when you test.
Yeah, there was a lot of movement between both areas as far back as the medieval period too, with Iona and stuff, and Dalriada Kingdom, and this cuts right through it. I mean, to some degree, you don't know who those people were exactly, but it shows. That's why I'm kind of excited too about more of the archaeology, the DNA testing they're doing of remains that they find and stuff. It's kind of neat to see how you tie into some of those individuals. And like I said, the closest one that Group One Doherty's tie into was a person on Faroe Islands that might have been they thought was a Viking, kind of how he's buried, but he was Irish at some point back, at times. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Very cool.
McPherson's a good Scottish name, Deborah.
Yeah. There you go, Kathleen. All right, Kevin, do you want to ask your question there? You have to unmute.
Hello, everyone. A little bit dry. It's early in the morning here. I'm from Brisbane, Australia. And I, by chance, discovered that this was on, but have been working. So my wife's maiden name, my wife's mother's maiden name was Devitt. So somewhat different, distant from me. But so I've sort of got a fair amount of knowledge on the Y DNA, having big Y tested myself and grandsons and so on. But in most of the other related people that I'm testing, we're sort of matched with almost no one. My own group is E. But anyway, I have quite an interest in the Devitt side of things. And earlier this evening, worked for an hour and a half or so online with someone who's done a lot of researching over the years, slightly more elderly than I am, in London, trying to advance the Y DNA side of things. So we've got 4 or 5 testers of the Devitt, and probably 2 or 3 of them are in the Daugherty project. They've been there for a long while, and I suppose nothing has really come of that as far as I can see. 2 of them, well, the one that I sort of paid for myself, I suppose, has tested at 111 markers. There's one at so there's any rate. I'd sort of constructed a table after the in the block tree nature, just based on the and so have 4 blocks, very, very simple ones, but just based on the STR tests, but with the SNPs as they're now reported, which I've done quite recently, and this was what I was discussing with this other researcher in London. Now, all these families are from a fairly close geographic area in County Clare, but when you look at it and listening tonight, you'd think that they were many centuries back, the connections, yet they are in a very restricted, fairly close geographic area, and some of them are matching autosomally, and matching with the well, they're all Devitt testers, and some of them are matching autosomally, though though they seem this so distant, and some I know are matching autosomally on other lines, not the paternal line sort of. But trying to connect up the. So really, my only question is that if I were to send you this small Excel spreadsheet with what I've done, would you
Yeah,
be able to comment on that?
yeah, I could help with interpreting it, and then also the kit numbers if you have of the testers. If they're in the Daugherty project, I could access it, but I would just if you show me those kit numbers or shoot me an email, I could, take a look and see what I could see.
I'll do that.
Because you
Yes,
can
so
do a mutation history tree with STRs only. It's just that it gets way too murky if you're talking about like you're sharing ancestry potentially 1,000 years ago. It's really hard to only use STRs for that. But it sounds like you have some other data and stuff too. And yeah, just shoot me an email, which is Zack
yes, yes. So
Daugherty
I can
surname.
I get your email from the Daugherty project.
Right. Yep. On the left hand side, you could click on my name because it shows the administrators
Yes.
there, and it will show you an email. Yep.
Yes. Yes. Thanks very much, and
Sure.
enjoyed it, but certainly
Thank you.
enjoyed it.
And also the same thing. Anyone could shoot me an email if they have more questions. I know that scrolling up, I don't know if she's still here. Mags Golden was asking if I could show all the groups. I didn't, just because it's kind of a mess right now. I mean, there's a lot of groups and subgroups, but I would be more than happy to get with people on that, and if they want to shoot me an email and try to explain as best as I can why they're put in those subgroups, why they might not be in a subgroup they think they should be in, and so forth. That just takes a little bit more time and a little one-on-one, to talk over, but I'm more than happy to do that.
Are there any other questions or comments? Dan, you put a few questions in the chat there. I don't know, Zach, if you can easily see them. Or Dan, why don't you unmute and just kind of ask your questions?
Here, how did your work related to what Cameron was promoting? Actually, I got into doing the Daugherty project and all this in 2016, so I kind of missed what he was doing. I'm a little new to the game, actually, in terms of that. I just went all into it, when I started exploring my grandfather's ancestry, and then I was like, oh, what's a Y-DNA test? And then got into all that, and I don't know when Cameron passed away, but what year, but I understood that he helped promote this. I don't know if Bob's here. I haven't seen him pipe up any, but Bob Daugherty, who's also an administrator that made me an admin, he also helped work on this. And then I forget I'd never actually have talked much with the person who created the project in 2003, 2004.
It would have been around then, I think. That might have been when it was.
So maybe he also participated in getting the project going then too, because I know he had
Cameron was promoting it, and there was a forum set aside, and it was the early start of that.
Oh, right, yeah.
Got his done. I saw your stuff flash past, and you mentioned the letter Kenny and the Williams, and there was a series of 3 Williams in there, and it's like, oh, okay, that sounds it's the area and the names, so. Maybe I'll pursue that. Which led me to as I mentioned, I do have a cousin. So a grandfather several years back was married twice, and we're descended from one. And this fellow that my father found is descended from the other, and I'm parallel generation with his kid. So we've been keeping in touch. So I thought, does that sound like he's on the land, like he's farming the land where our ancestors came from. So does that sound like a prime target?
Yeah, I mean, really, I personally would love, and we all have our own like wish list of who we
Yeah.
want tested. Because I know Michael, who presented last month, he would like to have a lot of these Virginia Doughertys test because a lot of them always want to throw their hat into a particular single genealogy when really they might be distantly related, and Y-DNA helps pull that apart. My wish list is to have more testers with known ancestry in particular regions in Ireland, for example, because that provides some of that geographical hotspot data that I find interesting.
Okay,
Because
well
again,
that's what I thought. And
yeah,
so he's yeah, he's just in the shadow of the Griannan, so
yeah, and if
okay.
that's where your brick wall ancestor hailed from and stuff, absolutely. Like,
Sounds like I guess that would help your project as well then because he's there. And
it would help that, and it would help anyone that matches you that could be in my situation or Michael's
right.
situation where it came into the U.S. so early that we can't really track exactly where they might have left Ireland. Again, it's not 100% that's some close match to you can say, "Oh, I came from that farm right next to him." You can't, jump to that conclusion without documentation, but it's a
Yeah.
good idea that you likely came from that area. And for instance, there's probably Doughertys that never made it up into the Inishowen Peninsula that are tested because they didn't always reside there. They moved in there in the late 1300s, for instance.
Mm.
I mean, they probably were always around, in at various parts of Donegal, but yeah, there's people because they started over on they thank historians that research it over on the far I don't know what area you call it, but like off to the west side, northwest corner of Donegal, and then moved around up into that area. But yeah, my wish list is more testers with known geographical location ancestry, and Ireland would also throw their hat into the ring, and get
Okay.
tested as well.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Zach, you could mention too about the testing that it goes on sale every so often.
Oh yeah, it does 4 or 5 times, maybe more a year. They every other month they're usually promoting, like Father's Day, for instance, all the Y tests will go on sale. There's not really one sale that's better than another. Like sometimes some sales might take it $10 more or $20 more off, but nothing huge, not it's not like it used to be where you could wait for like Black Friday, and then they used to have these coupon codes that you could throw in and you could get some crazy deals, but then they were like, oh wait, that's too much of a discount. Anyways, it's more standardized now and stuff, so every other sale is like any other. But there isn't anyone right now, but there was one that was going on for a month, that ended recently, but the next one would be probably June,
There
Father's
should be
Day.
there should be some Father's Day sales coming real soon.
Yeah, yeah. And
Like how long does it take for the results to come through?
right.
Usually it's a while.
So usually I would say when the test gets back to the lab, which is in Houston, Texas, and they ship internationally, by the point it gets back into the lab, it could be 4 to 8 weeks in general. If it's a big Y test you're doing, you're going to get partial results along the way. You're going to get the STRs, 111 STRs first, and then you're going to wait another month, another 4 weeks probably, and then the big Y portion of it that's like hundreds of thousands of SNPs and so forth will come in after that. So it kind of trickles in some, but yeah, usually 4 to 8 weeks after it gets back to the lab.
I guess I want to make a couple of comments. One, for Matthew had mentioned about, different surnames that pop up that aren't Doughertys. In my cluster, I have a Stroop, a Miner, and a Duncan. But they're all Doughertys because we've been able to figure that out through adoptions and through autosomal DNA and whatnot. So those random surnames do crop up, and you just have to kind of figure them out as they come up. And then conversely, Zack has mutations in himself and like just 2 or 3 generations above, and I've keep testing people who descend from a a common ancestor born in 1700 and they have no mutations yet, no shared mutations. So sometimes they're very stable and sometimes they're not. But that's the beauty of the Y700 is that you can build those trees and test the right people and break things down. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not, but you're not going to know how that mutation tree filters out until you do the testing.
Mhm.
Yep.
And usually if a budget is we talked about this with Michael's presentation last month, if there's budgetary concerns and so forth, I still recommend at least trying to get a Y37. If you fall into group 1 Doughertys though, I will warn you that you shouldn't just stop at a Y37. You should like probably go all out if you can with a big Y eventually, just because there's 300 testers in that overall group 1, and it's really hard to pull them apart on only that amount of data. But still, it's good to just get like at a Y37, look around and see what you're seeing with matches. They could be really distant, even though they show close at that low level. But then you could always upgrade. You don't need to mail a new sample to the lab because they will keep that sample in storage and it's usually good for a few years. So you could just like pay an upgrade during the sale period because the upgrades go on sale and go on up, to a higher granular level to just focus a little bit more. But again, if you're trying to compare or look at like how do I match this person who also only took a 37 test, you would need them to upgrade too if you're going to do that to compare more markers. So it's but yeah, that's a good way to get the foot in the door, and it's a more affordable test because these Y tests unfortunately are more expensive than Ancestry DNA. The autosomal tests are those they're able to manufacture in bulk so cheaply that they go on sale for $40-$50, whereas a Y37 is still like I think on sale like 110 or something. So but again, it's kind of like you only need to test one for a family group, whereas autosomal tests that's beneficial if you could test a lot of people, a lot of cousins to sort of branch out. This one you would only need a couple per an entire family cluster to really focus your research.
Yep. Any other questions, comments? I could keep listening to Zack all day. So I don't know. We've been on for a little over an hour and a half, so it might be time to call it. If there aren't any other comments, and just Zack, it's amazing. I always learn something new every time I talk to you about this, and I'm just so grateful for your time today, and I'm sure we all are. So we have recorded this presentation, and we'll get it posted somewhere that I'm not familiar with what they're doing, but Zack was dealing with posting up Michael's class from last week, and I think some of the others on the board are figuring that stuff out. So,
and we've been sharing that in the chat, like where
right.
this one will be posted when it's actually converted and everything, and then also links to the one that Michael did last month. So,
yeah. Anyways, any final comments, Zack, or do you feel like we talked out?
Yeah, no, I just appreciate everyone listening to me ramble. And like I said, a lot of this takes a little one-on-one if you have tested or if you're interested in testing. So just feel free to reach out and shoot me an email. I need to get back to some of my emails now. If I don't get back immediately, always, after a week, shoot me another. But I'm happy to, discuss this stuff. So don't hesitate to ask.
And all of us on the Clann Association board are volunteers, and we're doing what we can in the busyness of the other aspects of our lives and family and everything else. But each of us have a passion for this connection between us and other Doughertys and our homeland. I love the graphic that we have, and we have a member graphic this one says association board member, but if you want the member graphic, send us an email and we will send it to you, and you can sort of promote our Daugherty Clan Association and be proud of your heritage too. So we've created that so if you can have that as your virtual background if you want to. So yeah, so anyways, thank you everybody. And our next meeting, Rosie, do you want to talk about that for just a second?
Sure. And I know there's been a lot of chatter and links this last little bit, but probably 5 or 10 minutes ago, I posted our next class will be on the 21st of June, and it will be the same time. And we're having a beginning Irish class, which will be taught by an incredible Irish teacher. Her brand is Irish with Molly, and she's doing this just for our association. But of course, it's open to anyone. So if you know others who are of Irish descent and they'd love to come and learn some beginning Irish, it can be helpful just for preserving the culture, the language, our heritage. It also can be helpful for if you're trying to be able to read and understand genealogical records as you're doing your work as well. So there's lots of applications for having a better understanding of that language that our ancestors would have used. So we're looking forward to it.
Have a bit of fun. Yeah. So, and then in July, we are partnering with another genealogical association and going to learn about a little more about genealogy research and how to source your stuff that you find and how to put your names in that would be easier to use the search engines and those kind of things. And that's going to be taught by Mary Slauson. And then we're going to have an in-person meeting in Ireland on July 23rd at McGrory's in Kildare. And the man that just recently purchased that is a Daugherty. His name is Paddy Glacken, and his whole goal is to promote the clan and to promote heritage, music, cultural things that have to do with the area and have to do with our clans. So we're super excited to have that on the 23rd. So we'll have more information about that if you happen to be in Ireland or live in Ireland. I know Aidan lives in Ireland, and there's a few others on the call that do. And Kathleen's coming over. Rosie and I will be here. And so, anyways, we're going to have a fun night. Do a pub quiz, and we'll have a local politician who's a Daugherty come and introduce the meeting. You know, have to have that. But we're going to have a good time. All right. I guess we'll close the meeting if there's no more questions. I don't see any more hands, and we'll hopefully see you all next month. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank you.
Zach. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks, Zach.